Now, you may have noticed that extending our sprite span also makes it take longer for our animation to play. So it plays slower. Our movie is going to play, our animation is going to play slower because the playback head is still spending the same amount of time on each frame. It's still spending 1/15 of a second on each of these frames, even though, and because we extended our sprite span, our animation is going to take twice as long. We can remedy this. We can make it play faster by changing the amount of time that the playback head spends on each frame. Now, we learned one way to change the tempo of our movie in a previous lesson. Can you remember what that is? Well, if you recalled that we could change the tempo by setting our tempo in the tempo channel, you would be correct. So, for instance, we can expand so that we see our effects channels. And now in our tempo channel, which we can tell by the little clock there, we could double click here and we could increase the frame rate. It was at 15 frames per second, but we can change it to 30 frames per second if we wanted to, and click OK. And if we did that, then that means that from that first frame on, it's going to take 1/30th of a second on each frame. So it'll be twice as fast as 1/15th of a second on each frame as it was before. But let's not use this method, okay? Let's not use our tempo channel. There's another means of changing the tempo at which our movie is played. And that way is to use the control panel window, which you're probably familiar with by now from your book and other sources. But let's take a look at it right now. We select Window and Control Panel. This brings up our Control Panel window, and as you can see, it's quite similar to the controls for rewinding, stopping, and playing our movie, which we see on our Director toolbar. It's just a little bit more detailed. For instance, we can access our frame rate here. You see here, this is our tempo. Currently it's set at 15 frames per second. We can change this. We type in 30 here, 30. Now, when we play our movie, it will play at 30 frames per second. We can hit rewind here instead of up here. We hit rewind, press play, and now it's going to go at 30 frames per second. Okay, or it's going to try to. And we can scroll this down so we can see our animation playing. Watch it go. It's going a little faster than it was before. It's smoother, but it's also playing faster, so it winds up being about the same as it was before, just a little smoother. Now, if you'll notice, here at the bottom, it's showing the actual tempo, and we can scroll up a little bit. Here it shows the actual tempo. Just because we set our tempo at 30 frames per second, it may not actually go 30 frames per second. That all depends on the speed of the processor of the computer that you're on. So even though we set it to spend 1/30th of a second on each of these frames, if our computer isn't fast enough, it won't actually do 30 frames per second. So that's another thing that we can see. Other things of the control, other aspects of the control panel is it shows what frame we're currently on, which is 36. We can go forward frame by frame by clicking here. We can adjust the tempo, I mean not the tempo, but the volume of our movie here as well. Currently it's set on loud. That's fine. Let's leave it. Now, finally, one thing we can do is the looping. Remember how when we go through this animation, it just loops over and over and over. Well, that's kind of annoying. Let's turn off our looping by clicking on the Loop Playback button in our control panel. Close it. Now let's rewind and play. And now, when it gets to the end of the animation, it just stops. It doesn't go back to the beginning. And that can be a useful thing to be able to do.